Good morning, everybody. It is good to be with you in some form or fashion this morning. As you know, we would have loved to have met together, but just felt it was wise, especially during the early days of this COVID-19 outbreak, as we're trying to sort out what it means to be together and what's dangerous and what is not, out of a love for our community, not fear, but really out of our love for community and one another. We felt it would be best to just connect online. We'll revisit it in a couple of days and see if we need to continue this way, or hopefully we can gather again together soon, or perhaps in homes. Whatever the case, welcome to whatever this is called online, because we really haven't termed this anything other than a group of people that are gathering to fast and pray. And it has been good, and I think it has been timely that we are doing this together. I really, really believe that. Today, the president has declared to be a national day of prayer, calling for the nation to pray about this outbreak. And what an opportunity for the church to lean into our highest calling of intercession. And so we look forward to doing that. If you want to join us, we're going to be doing that this evening at 6 o'clock on a conference call. I'll give the number again at the end of the video, but you can dial into 425-436-6308, and the PIN would be 342419. I'll be giving you those numbers again at the end and including them in an email. So we would love to have you join us 6 o'clock tonight on a conference call as we honor our president's wishes and we pray for our nation in this season. What an opportunity to lean into intercession. You know, Wednesday was a little bit surreal because up until Wednesday, I think most of us thought this was just going to pass. But it felt like Wednesday, words like pandemic started being used, and some of us were a little jaded because we have survived things that we thought were like this before. I remember sitting in a group talking about the bird flu as if it were coming the next day. I don't know anybody who got the bird flu. I remember CNN running 6 weeks of Ebola coverage where you were convinced that everyone was going to get Ebola, and I don't think any of us knew anyone who got Ebola. But Wednesday night, as the president spoke to the nation and took decisive action about travel to Europe, and all of the news outlets kind of exploded with that. And we started hearing about so many college students that were going to be coming home for spring break and probably not going back to school this year. The St. Patrick's Day parade was canceled. The NBA suspended their season. All of a sudden, we started hearing about people from the media that we knew who were getting sick and were being sequestered. And suddenly, 4 days later from that, all of those things feel like small potatoes. But I've woken up the last couple of days and grabbed my phone and wondered, is this really happening? Or did I dream this? Because this does not seem like anything that has happened in our lifetime. One of the most overused words in the English language is the word unprecedented. And I think it's because the news industry has a tendency to send their youngest reporters out to cover very important things. And invariably, this reporter says things like, this is unprecedented. This has never happened before. And you wonder, is that really true? Or is it just that you're 24 years old and you don't have a life timeline that would give you a bit of perspective? When I started to pray about these events a couple of days ago, I began to feel like one of those reporters, though. I began to feel like this is unprecedented in our lives, but in the lives of believers in history. They had their own crisis, and they responded to it in godly ways. And I sensed that the Lord said we should talk today about stories to build our faith for prayer. Now, I'm not even beginning to be an infectious disease expert. I'm reading all the same websites and listening to all the same news reports you are. But this I know beyond a shadow of a doubt, is that people are afraid and that fear is real, and fear can cripple people. I read a few days ago about a woman who was walking into the grocery store, and as she was going in, an elderly woman called from a car. She and her husband were in their 80s, and they were sitting in the car, and they'd been there for 45 minutes. She was in tears, and she said, I'm afraid to go into the store because I'm afraid to get sick. She asked this stranger if she would go in and buy her groceries for her. When I read that, I began to realize we are moving into a season unlike what we have seen before. And our role in this season will be unlike what we have done before, because we've never experienced anything like this. But just because we've never experienced anything like this doesn't mean that no one has ever navigated these sorts of things. Ecclesiastes 1:9 tells us, "What has been is what will be, and what has been done is what will be done, and there is nothing new under the sun." So even though it feels like we're going through something that is unprecedented, there have been times and there have been people like us. And more than once, the times and the people came together for really remarkable results. This is not the first time that people have faced great challenge, and believers have been instrumental in God's answer for humanity. We are living in a time like that, and we can be those people. To understand our times requires that we know their stories. So I'm going to share a few scriptures this morning, but mostly I'm going to tell a story. And I'm hoping that you will listen to these events and you'll understand how they dovetail with our own season of fasting. It is not an accident that we're fasting for 40 days. This may be a tragedy on a national scale, but it is also a divine opportunity, and I don't want to miss it. If you turn the Wayback Machine back to the late 1800s, 1891, Rees Howells took a job in a Welsh coal mine. And his job was to scrape the coal from the sides of the coal mine and shovel it into a cart that would be pulled to the surface by ponies. It's important to understand that Rees was 12 years old at this time. Still as a young man, he moved to the United States looking for better work. And when he was in the United States at the age of 23, he was struck by a nearly fatal dose of typhoid fever. A virus nearly took his life. Now, we are on the cusp of a lot of serious conversations that might not have taken place just a few weeks ago. Because many people, just like Rees Howells, in their time of danger, suddenly begin to think about eternity. Ecclesiastes 3:11 says that eternity is written on the hearts of men. And just like it is written right now on your neighbor's hearts and on your heart, it was written on this young man's heart. He began to visit the meetings being held by Maurice Rubin. Rubin was a messianic believer who was preaching the gospel. And Rees Howells gave his life to Christ in that season because he was thinking about eternity as he was thinking about his own life. When he returned to Wales, he had a series of deep encounters with the Lord during the Welsh revival. In 1904 to 1905, over 100,000 people came to Jesus in the rural area of Wales. It had such an impact on people that even after the revival waned, for the next 20 years in New Swansea Baptist Church, they had to set up chairs in the aisles because the churches were so full every week. Howells was deeply marked in that revival. Now, if you know me, you know that I love and I burn for revival. It's what I want to see in our day. But revival is never just about good meetings. During those times of the outpouring of the Spirit, he was deeply marked, but it was for a later time. And for those of you that have encountered revival perhaps in your past, what God did in that season is to be made manifest in this season. Not necessarily replicating the meetings, but to empower you to move forward and act in power in these days. Revival is for something. And what it was in Rees Howells' life was it ruined his appetite for what was normal. After a short time of working in the coal mines again, he felt called into ministry, and so he started a little bit of a congregation that would meet in his home. He drew a lot of criticism from his congregation because they felt he wasn't doing what a pastor should be doing. What he was doing was getting up in the middle of the night to spend 3 hours every night in prayer. One night, as he was reading in prayer, he read from Numbers chapter 6, verse 5, where it says, "All the days of his vows of separation, no razor shall touch his head. Until the time is complete for which he separates himself to the Lord, he shall be holy. He shall let the locks of his hair of his head grow long." What Rees Howells read about there was called a Nazirite vow. Samson took one. John the Baptist took one. Other people down through Bible history took one. And people thought he was a little bit crazy, but Rees Howells took a Nazirite vow, and for months he went without cutting his hair or shaving. You know, at your greatest moments of consecration, there will be friends who tell you you're crazy. At your greatest display of devotion for the Lord, as he set his life aside to take this Nazirite vow, people thought he was a little nuts. By the end of his vow, which incidentally he finished off with a 15-day fast, people said they began to sense the presence of God on his life. When he would walk into the room, people would notice. It was as if the activity of God just increased when he was in the room. He said later that he felt that in that season he had gained what he called the gained position of intercession. It was like he suddenly had a tactical advantage in the spirit realm. And he would claim that tactical advantage, that gained advantage of intercession for the rest of his life. As we fast together, I want to gain that tactical advantage of intercession. I want the presence of God to be so real in our lives that when doctors gather and don't have hope, they're actually relieved to see intercessors show up because intercessors have an advantage. Now, just as World War I started, Rees Howells and his wife felt called to Africa. Now, the waters around England were very dangerous in that season because Germany had declared that anything moving on the water was an enemy vessel. And 2 months before he left for Africa, the German submarine had sunk the Lusitania, and over 1,200 souls had died in that. So as they were leaving for Africa on this ship, the tension level was through the roof. Rees Howells took a look at his frightened passengers, and he told all of them that they were going to be fine because he was going to Africa to preach the gospel. If our faith is strong in good times, but weak in bad times, is that really faith at all? He had this incredible faith, and he realized that these were the times he was made for. At that point, he said, now is the best time to test the Bibles in wars because we are in one ourselves. He said, this is the best time to see if what Scripture says is true. This is the best time to test our faith. This is the best time to exercise our authority as a believer because now we're in a crisis. Now, they were fine. He and his wife went to Africa and they saw 5 years of widespread revival across the continent of Africa. Then they returned to Wales, where he would ultimately step into his highest calling in the gained position of intercession. In 1924, he and his wife founded the Bible College of Wales. And the goal was sending missionaries who were trained theologically, but also in the ways of practical faith. And one of the ways he did that was teaching them about praying through, or praying about a problem or an issue until breakthrough happened. And his students prayed through for everything. They prayed through for finances. They prayed through for a toothbrush. And nobody took this more seriously than Rees Howells. While they were praying for tuition and toothbrushes, Rees Howells was praying for real estate. And during the time of running the Bible College of Wales, he and his wife bought 3 different campuses fully paid for, even though when he made offers on each of those campuses, he had no money whatsoever. Kelsey has actually stood at one of these campuses. A couple of years ago, she went with Lou Engle and Dutch Sheets as they went back to rededicate that campus. It's a Bible college again. And so she has stood at some of these properties. After Rees Howells passed away, Leonard Ravenhill, another one of my favorites, spoke at his Bible college. And he recounted that Rees Howells' wife told him, "Many talk of my husband buying this place with a shilling or 14 cents in his pocket. What they forget is that he prayed 12 hours a day for 11 months to know the mind of God." Her message was, if you can pray to get the mind of God, you can have faith that goes beyond what is even reasonable. If we can get the mind of God regarding this crisis in our nation, we have the gained position of intercession. This is what is written about in 1 John chapter 5, 14 and 15. And this is the confidence that we have towards him, that if we ask anything according to his will, he hears us. And we know that he hears us in whatever we ask. We know that we have the requests that we have asked of him. In other words, if we can get God's heart for the hour that we live in, whatever we ask for in agreement with him, he will deliver. You would understand why some thought that Rees Howells may have lived out his highest calling. He's gone to Africa, he's come back, he started a Bible college, but even the revival in Africa was not his highest calling. As World War II started to rage, something rose up within Howells' heart to pray for the nation of England and for the people of England. And each day, as Hitler's advances would come across Europe in a wave, Howells would pray for his students. He was fueled by the faith that God intervened in the affairs of men, and that in prayer he could affect more lives than he could ever touch in the physical world. He wrote in his journal, "I want to know that the Holy Spirit is stronger than the devil in the Nazi system. This is the battle of the ages, and victory here means victory for millions of people." The victory that we are fasting and praying for during these 40 days is not just about us. It could mean victory and freedom and life for literally millions of people. I want you to start expanding the scope of your prayer beyond your family and beyond our even little group. I want you to begin to pray and believe that God would do something in our nation. Because as Rees Howells said, the victory we gain here can mean victory for millions. As the Nazis marched across Europe, England realized they were very susceptible to attack by the air. They controlled the English Channel fairly well, but the Germans could attack from the air. Royal Air Force pilots were outnumbered at this point 4-1. At the beginning of the Battle of Britain, it looked really bad. September 8th, 1940, air raid sirens took off as Nazi planes appeared on the horizon, and initial reports listed heavy damage all across Europe and in England, with military targets and civilians suffering direct hits. Rees Howells wrote in his journal a phrase during this season, something that maybe you've said. He says, "We have never walked this way before." He said, "We don't know what's coming. We're seeing things in the news and we're hearing things on the radio that we have never heard before. We've never walked this way before." Understand, when you're in uncharted waters like we are, you better find the mind of God. You better have spent that time in prayer and fasting so you know what God thinks, because you can't trust your own mind. Rees Howells and his students saw their faith levels rise to believe God, and believing that they had heard God, that he wanted to keep them safe. They began to pray that no bomb would fall on the property of the Bible College. And even though strategic docks were only 2 miles away that were getting hammered by the bombs, during the course of the war, no bomb fell on Rees Howells Bible College property. You know, we look as prayer as an ongoing dialogue, and it is. But remember, Rees Howells thought about it with an air of finality, that you couldn't just pray about a problem, you could pray through a problem. And as time, he came to feel that they had victory over this issue. He wrote in his journal one day, "I could put in print that no devil can touch anyone here." He had that kind of assurance that he had heard from God. And the worse things looked in England, the more faith grew in their hearts. 2 days later, in his journal, he wrote, September 10th, 1940. "After the victory of Sunday, there is great liberty to pray that God will really deal with the devil in the Nazis and put an end to this wicked system. Our prayer for London is that God will turn the tide and now save lives." Now, at this point, he had little to base this optimism on, other than that God had spoken to him. 2 days later, he writes in his journal again, "We prayed last night that London would be defended and that the enemy would fail to break through, and God answered our prayer. If we have protection for our properties, why not get protection for our country?" Friends, if you have faith for your family, why not believe in faith for your community? If you have faith that your family is going to be fine, why not pray for your nation? Why not extend that covering as far as you can? God was faithful. He didn't allow any bombs to fall on campus property throughout the war. Complete safety was given to the staff and to the students and their families. Now, here's another piece that is kind of a key to Rees Howells' prayer and intercession. He knew it was about more than just him and his family and even his nation. It was about the purposes of God on the earth, beyond England. Now, keep in mind, this was years before Israel had been reinstituted as a nation. Jews were scattered across the earth at this time. September 14th of 1940, just a few days before that after that previous quote, he wrote, "Because we have believed, God has made known to us what is to come to pass. Every creature is to hear the gospel. Palestine is to be regained by the Jews, and the Savior is to return." Rees Howells understood that the battle of his lifetime was not just about his life. It wasn't just about his nation. It was about the nation of Israel and the return of Jesus to the planet. Friends, what we're fasting and praying for is not for more disinfectants and toilet paper. It's not even for the health of Kansas City, although we believe for that. It's not just that our nation would be delivered, although we believe for that. We are praying for the purposes of God on the earth and the return of Jesus in our time. Let the strategy and the press conferences be led by the government. Let the church get air superiority in the spirit realm. It's the only part of our job that is doable. In Churchill's war memoirs, he gives September 15th, 1940, as the culminating date in the Battle of the Air. He went that day to visit the operations room of the RAF, the Royal Air Force, and he watched as they would lay out discs on a table or a map that would represent different squadrons that were flying towards them and those that were taking off from England to defend. There were way more Nazi discs than there were discs of the Royal Air Force on the map, and he asked the Air Marshal at one point, "What other reserves do we have?" The Air Marshal looked at him for a moment and said, "There are none." Another 5 minutes passed, and Churchill recorded in his memoirs, "It appeared that the enemy were going home. The shifting of the discs on the table showed a continuous eastward movement of the German bombers and fighters. No new attack appeared. In another 10 minutes, the action was ended." There was no reason that the Luftwaffe should have turned for home just at the moment that victory was in their grasp. What Churchill could not win on the military table, Rees Howells and his students and his little scrappy band of intercessors fasting and praying were winning in the spirit. After the war, Air Chief Marshal Lord Dowling, the commander-in-chief of the fighters, said this, "Even during the battle, we realized from day to day how much external support was coming in. At the end of the battle, one had the sort of feeling that there had been some sort of divine intervention to alter the sequence of events which would otherwise have occurred. What God is calling us to do is to partner with Him in prayer that there would be some sort of divine intervention to alter the sequence of events. Friends, in our prayer and our fasting, we can affect what is on the news tomorrow." A month before this all happened, Churchill was traveling by car along with General Hastings Ismay on his way to give a speech to the House of Commons. Knowing what he was about to call the Royal Air Force to do, to defend England outnumbered 1-4, he was reading his speech in advance, and he read the line that many of us have heard, "Never have so many owed so much to so few." General Ismay, riding next to him, interrupted him, and he said, "What about Jesus and the disciples?" Churchill stopped for a moment, he took out a pen, and he altered his speech, and he wrote, "Never in the field of human conflict have so many owed so much to so few." We are grateful for those fighting this battle in the physical. We want to speak blessings to doctors and to politicians and to business leaders and to community leaders, every health worker, every leader, every vigilant mom with a bottle of sanitizer. We want to participate in that effort, not in fear, but in faith and knowing that it's kind to our neighbor. But we also want to take our place of authority as intercessors. Our most significant role in this fight is at a different level, to gain the strategic advantage of intercession. It's the one thing the Church of Jesus is uniquely positioned to do. And I intend to fight. I'd like you to fight alongside me. I hope soon we can gather together. I hope we can watch our kids play and we can sit and drink coffee and have these things face to face. Quite frankly, it's hard for me to do this on video. It's just not how I'm wired. But I hope we can be together soon. But I know we can stand together in prayer. I would encourage you again to join me tonight. In the description here, I'll give the numbers that you can call and the pin that you can enter in so that we can pray together as our president has asked for. What an opportunity for the church. Let's take it.